The following is a special presentation on AZTV 7.
Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. This AZTV special program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2022 midterm elections. We'll be talking with candidates and data analysts to give you insight into who and what is on the ballot. Today is our last show for this election season. And joining me is Laurie Roberts, columnist at the Arizona Republic. We're going to be giving an overview of the general election, looking at the main messages for candidates and parties, talking about political violence, ballot drop box intimidation, as well as looking forward at what could happen if the Democrats or the Republicans were to sweep in these elections. We also will be joined by former Governor Jan Brewer. She'll be back in studio talking about her point of view on the governor's office and what she thinks the next Arizona governor needs to do. And Mike Noble is back in our Tracking Arizona segment talking about the current issue on voters' minds as we head into this election. Stick around. We have all the information you need to know. We'll be back here in exactly 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining me right now is columnist at AZ Central, Laurie Roberts. Laurie, welcome.
Hi.
Been very interesting, to say the least, this election season. How would you assess what you've seen so far?
Crazy, chaotic. People are at each other's throats. I think that we should all be counting the days until this is over and try to figure out whoever is our future leadership, that they dedicate themselves to trying to bring us together and figure out what unites us and what we can do to move the state forward.
What are big moments for you? Anything that stands out to you in this election cycle where there are big moments?
Almost every day has been a big moment. I think that for Katie Hobbs, a big moment was her, I would say, bungling of the whole debate thing. They took, first of all, she never should have gone into a race for governor thinking you didn't have to debate your opponent. But they managed to somehow mishandle that story to the point where a 1 or 2 day story became one of the key moments in her whole campaign. For Kari Lake, it is, maybe the drag queen controversy as just a symbol of the entire campaign and the culture wars, and in my view, a misdirection of what's really going on in this country. I thought that she totally mishandled that, never should have made a huge deal out of it, in that she acted as if you got, grab your children and head for the hills because drag queens are coming to indoctrinate them. And I think it's just such a gross overstatement that then became the focus for weeks and weeks.
In that race specifically, do you think that either candidate has done a good job or a better job than the other at reaching to those independent middle voters?
I don't think either candidate has done a good job in that regard. You traditionally expect both of the candidates to come from the more extreme wings of their parties. That's just the way that we're set up with partisan primaries and the people who vote in those. And then they traditionally try to soften their stance or come to the middle to get those independent voters in the general. Kari Lake has not done that at all. If anything, she's doubled down on her ultra MAGA pro-Trump stand, even though independents are not known to really love the whole Trump candidacy. You saw that in 2018 and 2020. In the case of Katie Hobbs, I think on the abortion issue in particular, she could have said that I am for abortion rights, but she continually said, I don't think there should be any limits on abortion, is basically what she was saying. Well, she didn't put it that way, but she said, I think it should be between a woman and her doctor. But that conjures up an image of an unfair image, I think, and one that's not true, but an image of women that are, carrying babies for 8 months and waking up one morning and saying, I think I'll go have an abortion today, which of course doesn't happen. It's exceedingly rare at that point and usually has to do with medical situations. But she opened the door to making it sound like, or allowing the other side to portray her as someone who prefers no limits at all on abortion ever. And I don't think the middle feels that way.
So let's talk about some of that extremism. We know that the most recent case we've seen is the attack on Paul Pelosi. From what we're seeing, this seems to be a mentally ill person, but immediately people are going to political rancor fostering violence. Do you think that happens on both sides of the aisle and it gets too violent and there's too many people that are doing this, or do you think it is one-sided?
This year, I think it is pretty much, from what I've seen, it's pretty much one-sided. Of course, in, I think, 2017, we saw Steve Scalise, Representative Scalise, who was shot at a congressional baseball game. So certainly it's not one-sided. Neither side has the franchise on being able to rile up crazy people. I would have thought that might have been an opportunity for both sides to dial back the rhetoric. But in this case, that hasn't happened.
When you see this, when you see the kind of rhetoric that's going on right now, the President of the United States yesterday going after MAGA Republicans again, they're saying they're a danger to democracy. Do you think that is something that needs to stop as well? Or do you think the President is sending a message of stopping violence as a whole, but just saying it about one side because of what just happened?
Well, right now, what's going on is what happened with Mr. Pelosi. Right. So that makes sense. But I do think the Republicans that are on the ticket right now represent a danger to democracy. They will not admit that the election was, that, they continue to say that the election was stolen. They have no evidence of it. Even in the last 2 weeks, Mark Finchem has come up with new conspiracy theories about how the election was stolen. He has no evidence of this. At some point, you ought to put up or shut up. Every single credible review of this election in Arizona has shown that that Joe Biden won. They will not accept that. They have left open the idea that if they don't win this election on Tuesday, that they may well not accept that. I think that is democracy under attack.
Let's talk about what happens. Let's take a look at if either party were to win these races. If it was a sweep or close to a sweep for either party, what happens in the state with these 6 statewide races?
Well, I don't think either side will sweep, first of all. I think it's going to be a mixed bag. But I think if the Democrats win, you're going to hear the Republicans say cheat, fraud, not fair. I think if the Republicans win, you will see the Democrats gnashing their teeth and probably turning on each other to wonder where they went wrong and how they once again snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, this was supposed to be a huge Republican year. Biden is not popular. Historical voting trends are such that the party out of power in the midterm usually picks up seats in the midterm election. In Arizona, Republicans have a big turnout advantage, anywhere from 4 to 8% in a midterm, because Democrats and particularly independents simply don't show up. The Republicans should have been mopping the floor with the Democrats, and every single one of the key races is going to come right down to the line. They are all deadlocked.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I love your years of experience and the wealth of knowledge you have of what happens here in Arizona. I look forward to having you back and talk about results once they're in, and we can talk another look forward.
That'll be like Christmas time, right?
I think, yeah, unfortunately. That's a joke, but I don't think it's far from the truth.
I don't think it's a joke.
Yeah. Well, Laurie, thank you as always. All right, we'll be back here in just a moment on Before You Vote. Coming up next, we're taking a look at the current issues as we head into the election. Find out what issues are a priority for Arizona voters. Plus, later in the show, I sit down with former Governor Jan Brewer. Hear her point of view on the governor's office. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining us again from OH Predictive Insights is Mike Noble with our Tracking Arizona segment. Mike, welcome back.
It's good to be back, Mike.
Let's talk about the top issues in Arizona. Go down the list for me here. What are the top 3 or 4 big issues for all the voters in Arizona?
Well, unsurprisingly, number 1 issue, economy and inflation for Arizona voters, with almost 1/3 of them saying that's their top issue. But next highest on the list is actually abortion, followed by immigration, and then number 4 is actually threats to democracy.
What's interesting about this and looking at this list is that if you look, education is not in the top 3 or top 2 where it has been classically in Arizona. Why is that?
That's a great observation, Mike, is that in the last 2 or 3 election cycles here in Arizona, immigration is definitely, or education has definitely been in the top 3 issues here in Arizona. But interestingly enough, education is really not on voters' mind, and the Red for Ed movement that we've seen really hasn't appeared.
Let's take a look at demographics, whether it's Republican, Democrat, or Independent. What do you see here in this graph about this? What does this tell you?
Well, it tells you that economy and inflation is still the top issue right now, but also you see that abortion is up there on voter priorities, especially among independents. But when you look at threats to democracy and immigration, what's really interesting about it is that immigration is very much a base issue for Republicans, but it's also threats to democracy is basically a base issue now. It's like their immigration issues to Republicans, threats to democracy is to Democrats.
When you look at this and you look at where the independent voters fall, if you're a candidate, how closely are you watching what's serious to independent voters?
Well, you should be watching incredibly closely, especially if you're in this general election right now, because it's interesting is that much of the electorate, probably about 8 in 10 voters, are very much party loyal. And so when you look at that true independents, they're a very small group, and they don't like either party. So what issues matter to them is important, because that will separate victory from defeat for candidates in November.
Let's look at Hispanic voters, suburban women, moderates, independents, and Maricopa County as a whole. What does this tell you?
Well, again, economy inflation is still the top issue, but especially in that green bar, which is Hispanic Latinos, it's their most important issue. And then I also have abortion, where it's a little bit bigger among suburban women, which have been a key group. So that suburban shift was really what moved Arizona from a ruby red state to a battleground state. And then, of course, immigration, kind of even across the board, and then threats to democracy, a bit more outsized among more politically ideological moderates.
Very quickly, how much of a shift has there been from Democrat voters, Hispanic voters, Democrat to Republican?
You know, that's interesting. Democrats, especially even 2 years ago, Democrats carried Hispanic Latino voters by about, 20 points or so in that area. And right now we're seeing in Arizona or Nevada, other states, that these Hispanic Latinos have shifted to the right. They're still lean Democrat, but they're only about +5, +7 for Democrats, when they used to be much higher previously. So they've very much shifted.
As always, thanks, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back here on Before You Vote. Coming up next, former Governor Jan Brewer tells us what it was like for her in the governor's office and what she thinks the next Arizona governor needs to do. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining me, Governor Jan Brewer. Thanks for doing this again.
Oh, my privilege.
I want to talk about the job of the governor, but I want to start kind of at the beginning with you, because you got involved in politics because of school boards.
Absolutely. I lived in a very small school district in Deer Valley. There were 2 grade schools, and I was very concerned about my children's education. So I went to school board meeting with my husband, and I walked out of there and I said to my husband, I said, who are those people and how did they get there? He says, they're elected. I said, well, I probably didn't vote for them. He says, no, you probably did. I said, no, I would never do that. So I continued to go back for a few more meetings and realized that I didn't like what they were doing. And so I thought, well, I'll run for the school board. My husband comes home one night and I said, John, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run for the school board. And will you support me? He said, yes. And I said, financially? And he said, yes. I said, oh, great. But he says, Jan, if you really want to make a difference, run for the legislature. I said, me? No, I'm going to do the school board. So I thought about it for a few more days. And he came home and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to run for the legislature if I have a bigger impact. And that was the beginning of my elected career. And it was, 32 years later.
Yeah, so the moral of the story is,
don't run for a school board. You become governor. You're faced with all kinds of problems and ridicule.
So, Do you see the connection now with so many people paying attention and running for the school boards again across the country, not just here? There's a big connection now.
Absolutely. I think that, when you look at it, America, there's nothing more important than your school boards and the schools that your children go to. And the emphasis has been there forever. And we've got to be sure that our kids get a good education, whether it be private schools, charter schools, or public schools. I know charter schools are part of the public school system, but no, it's very, very important, and parents need to pay attention to what's going on, weigh in, because they do sometimes get out of control.
So let's talk about the job of being governor. When you got that call, when it was you were told that Janet Napolitano was leaving and you were going to become the governor of Arizona, what was your initial reaction?
Well, I was, I didn't actually get a call. I was Secretary of State, so I was 2 floors down from her. I knew kind of what was going on. There was too many people there. Obama's coming in and out, all kinds of campaign people and everything. And so when he won, everybody started talking to me about that. She's going to go. She's going to get an appointment, and that you'll be there. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't believe that. I think it was denial, a lot of it. I never had wanted to be governor. It wasn't something in my plans, but and then when I realized it was going to happen, then we really had to sit down and really get myself together and be organized, because I knew this was not being part of a 90-member committee anymore. It was a big deal, and we were facing very difficult times.
And I want to talk about those difficult times in a moment, but then for the next governor, whoever it is, what would you say to them that they need to expect?
I think that they need to expect some rough times going forward. I know that I experienced bad times when I went in, but I think that 2024 is going to be very difficult. I think we're going to see some definite budget problems and issues because of some legislation and things that got passed that made things good for a while, but I think that we'll have to pay the piper on that. But going into the governor's office for anybody, they need to set their North Star. And what is it that they want to accomplish during their time that they're serving the people of Arizona? And they've got to surround themselves with good policy people. They need to know what they're talking about, and they have to listen to the governor, because you instinctively know some things that you want or you believe in, and you have to work carefully with those people, and you've got to know the leadership of both parties in the legislature to work and to deal with them, and you move forward, and you got to plant your flag, and you got to move on.
So I've said many times on the radio show, I've talked about how the great strides that Arizona has made economically since Governor Ducey's been in office, that there's been a diversity of our economy. But I've also given a lot of credit to the fact that what you inherited with the crash that happened, how close to the edge was Arizona's economy when the crash happened?
Oh, we had the biggest budget deficit in the country per capita. I had a $10 billion budget with $7 billion. I had no money to pay my employees. So I had to go in there and really, I shut down all the regulation, deregulate, and getting rid of departments. I had to cut the budget. I had to come up with a plan, which I pushed back, a 3-point plan to get it under control. And established the Arizona Commerce Authority, did away with the Commerce Department so that we have a quasi-public-private partnership that was very, very successful. And we were very lucky that we had many companies come to Arizona during that time. Forbes said we were the number one state to do business in during those terrible times. And we raised taxes at the same time so that we could take care of 60,000 people that lost their health care and to take care of our schools. And the public overwhelmingly supported me in that. Never voted for a tax increase in my life, but we went to the legislature. They wouldn't pass it, so I said, well, send it to the voters. And they did, and it passed overwhelmingly with 67% of the vote. Saved our state.
When you look at the job of governor, when an outsider looks at the job of governor, it is the chief executive, and you get to make a lot of the big decisions. But along with that is some isolation, because you are also going to be criticized by people on your own side of the aisle. How does the next governor deal with that, making a solid decision and then standing behind it? Because sometimes that's the hardest thing to do.
That's planting your flag. My mother always told me growing up, Mike, that, you know, doing the right thing almost always means doing the hard thing, and boy, was she right. And I thought about that many times when I was governor. You have to have your plan, you have to have everybody in line with you, and then you got to go out there and sell it. But once you plant your flag, then you don't back down. This is the direction we're going. I vetoed 3 budgets. I had everybody in the legislature mad at me because he wouldn't do what I wanted him to do. They finally resolved to the fact that they were going to do it. I mean, I wasn't going to give up.
Well, history surely served you well, because in the end, Arizona's in the place it is because of the decisions you had to make with that legislature.
Thank you.
So I want to, again, thank you for coming down and doing this. You are such a wealth of information and such a big part of all of us here in Arizona, and I would love to have you back anytime.
And let me say that it was an honor to be the governor of the great state of Arizona. And thank you.
You're very welcome. This is Governor Jan Brewer. We'll be back here in a minute on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. I want to thank all of our guests today, starting with Laurie Roberts, columnist from the Arizona Republic, and the great perspective she brought to the issues. And of course, former Governor Jan Brewer. It's always a pleasure to hear her story and talk about her time in office. And of course, a big thank you to Mike Noble from OH Predictive Insights and what he brought to the table. We've covered all top 6 races and discussed all of the propositions on the ballot. If you missed any of these interviews, head over to aztv.com/vote. Election day is this Tuesday, November 8th. Make sure your voice is heard in this election. We hope you've enjoyed our deep dive into the ballot for 2022's midterm elections. I've got to say, it's been a pleasure to work with this great team of people on this. We hope it was informational. As I always say, we should be informed voters, and I hope this show helped you in that capacity. Looking forward to what the next year brings. Thank you for joining us on this season of Before You Vote.